I really wanted to pay it forward. And I also want to continue to be a voice and advocate for our patients and members. And there's no better platform than ONS to take my advocacy to the next level. I could not be prouder to lead ONS in this role and to contribute to its mission of excellence in oncology nursing and transforming cancer care.
You're listening to the Oncology Nursing Podcast, where ONS Voices Talk Cancer, a resource from the Oncology Nursing Society. Through conversations with subject matter experts, we examine the important issues in oncology nursing, from new treatments to patient-centered research to advancements in clinical practice. Join us as we hear from nurses in all facets of oncology care, from bench to bedside and everywhere in between. Welcome to the Oncology Nursing Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Oncology Nursing Podcast. I'm Brenda Nevidjon, the Chief Executive Officer at ONS, and your host for this episode that's going to introduce you to the newest members of your ONS Board of Directors. Today, I'm joined by ONS Directors at Large, Susan Brown, Jessica MacIntyre, and Trey Woods. They're the first directors who have been appointed to their positions under the new bylaws. As a reminder, in 22, members approved transitioning to an appointment process as opposed to an election. We'll be having a conversation about their experience as the first cohort to be appointed as directors, their reflections on their experiences within ONS and in oncology nursing, and their work on the ONS board, among other things. Remember, you can also earn free NCPD contact hours by completing the evaluation we've linked in the episode notes. To begin our discussion, I'd like to briefly describe the role and responsibility of the board to those listening. The board is the decision-making body that has fiduciary and strategic responsibility for ONS, our member organization. The directors and officers identify ONS's direction, sustain its future by adopting sound, ethical, and legal governance and fiscal management policies, and ensure that ONS has adequate resources to advance its mission. To support that work, the board hires and supervises the chief executive officer. I have been honored to work with excellent boards who embody the diversity and expertise of our members and who put the mission and the members central to their decisions. The three directors at large that I'm talking with today are members of my 10th board. Let's begin with a little background on your careers. Have you always been an oncology nurse, or did you start in something else? Where do you work now? What's your role there? Can you remember your earliest memory of ONS, something from when you maybe first joined, and other volunteer roles you may have had in ONS, in the foundation or the certification corporation? Susan, would you like to begin us with this one?
Thanks, Brenda, and hello to everybody who might be listening to the podcast. So I'm Susan Brown. I am currently the Chief Nursing Officer and Senior Vice President for Patient Care Services at the City of Hope in Duarte, California. City of Hope is one of our NCI designated comprehensive cancer centers. And so I'm very pleased and blessed to be the CNO here. I've been an oncology nurse for a very long time. My career in oncology started 43 years ago when I graduated with my BSN, joined the Air Force to see the world, and saw San Antonio, Texas for 4 years. Love San Antonio. I was stationed at Wilford Hall at Lackland Air Force Base, and believe it or not, 43 years ago, they had a new grad residency program. And I thought I was going to be an ER trauma nurse. But when I did my rotation in that residency on the oncology unit, I fell in love and knew that's how I was going to spend the rest of my life. So for 43 years, I've been in the oncology world, either leading oncology nursing or cancer program development in one form or another. My earliest memory of ONS, I was having trouble remembering. I think my first Congress was in like 1984, 1985. So by that time, Congress had been happening for a few years already. And all I can remember is going to Congress and being so inspired and so impressed with all the people that I met there. I ran right back to South Jersey and worked with some colleagues and decided to form the South Jersey chapter of ONS. So worked with a group of fabulous nurses in the area, along with a drug rep who helped get us started, and was the founding president of South Jersey chapter. That led me to then go to, used to be called Chapter President's Leadership Weekend at headquarters in Pittsburgh. It was my first trip to Pittsburgh, and thought, oh my gosh, this is wonderful. Look at all this networking I can do. Look at all these new people I can meet. And so decided then I needed to put my money where my mouth was and joined Chapters Committee, was able to be part of Chapters Committee for several years, and then went on to be on the Congress Committee for several years. So got to plan 3 different conferences over the course of my tenure on Congress Committee. When my role changed a little bit, my active participation in national ONS fell off a little bit. I still continued to attend Congress every year, but I moved into cancer program administration and sort of began working with some other organizations that were in some ways still connected to ONS, but my role had changed a little bit. So always been a fan of ONS and can't believe I'm going on my 44th year in the business. So
Thanks, Susan. So Trey, share a little bit about yourself. And I'm curious, both from your perspective and Jessica, when it's your turn, were you a member when we had committees? Because I'll just shed a piece of history there. We eliminated committees at the end of the 1990s and went to project teams, task forces, advisory panels, things that were shorter commitment so more members could participate. So I think members might like to know whether Trey and Jessica also have those memories of committees or not. Trey, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Brenda. And again, thanks for having us today. I appreciate Susan's response. That's a tough act to follow, but my path is a little bit different. I began working in radiation oncology in 2008, so I don't really have memories of those late 1990s that you were speaking of. So my tenure in oncology began in 2008, and I wish that I could say that it was a path that was very well thought out, but I sort of stumbled into oncology, and it's been just a great journey ever since. Whenever I started in 2008, I began working as a nurse practitioner in radiation oncology at the University of Mississippi Medical Center. So radiation oncology is the only academic medical center in the state, the only level 1 trauma center in the state, and it's the only hospital in the state that treats pediatric patients. It was very much a big opportunity for me, and I'm blessed to have gone down this path at that point in time. Now, I can tell you that my earliest memory of ONS dates back to the Advanced Practice Nursing Conference, and I believe it was held in Seattle, Washington. And I just remember attending that conference as a new advanced practice nurse in radiation oncology, and I was just mesmerized by the networking that was happening, by the energy in that conference, and I just remember leaving that conference feeling rejuvenated. Honestly, that is what sparked my interest to get more involved with ONS. I've been fortunate over the years to volunteer in a number of different roles with ONS. I've been pretty heavily involved over the last 10 years, particularly on a national level. Really, my service started back in 2011 when I was able to serve on a planning team for, actually, it was the last APN conference, I believe, prior to Congress taking over. Then in 2012, I led a planning team that put together the ONS Radiation E-Conference. And at the time, this was a pretty new thing in that this was not a in-person event, but a virtual conference that was being tested. And I think that it was very widely accepted and was a big success. But that was the way for me to get my foot in the door. 2014, I served as chair of the ONS Radiation Oncology Nurse Practitioner Work Group. This is a time where we're trying to figure out what to do with nurse practitioners in oncology and more specific radiation oncology. And believe it or not, that work even continues today. In 2016 and in 2018, I had the opportunity to serve on different ONS Congress planning teams. 2019, I served as chair of the planning team and also participated in an ONS leadership think tank. I've also served with the Oncology Nursing Forum, served with the Oncology Nursing Foundation and Certification Corporation. So, an emphasis on my service really has been on lots of volunteer opportunities, lots of committee work. And I just feel like that's opened the door to me for so many great opportunities, great networking opportunities. And I would certainly encourage anybody who's interested in leadership or volunteer to look into the multitude of opportunities that ONS makes available to the members.
That's just great. And thanks for the promotion to encourage members to raise their hand. We'll come back to that in a little bit. Jessica, why don't you share a little bit about your story and your memories of ONS?
I have always been an oncology nurse. As many people that go into the field of oncology, I was actually touched by cancer with my grandmother. She had metastatic breast cancer. And at the time I was in high school and I was thinking about career paths. What did I want to do? What did I want to go to college? What I want to do when I got to college? And nursing came to mind because of the way all the nurses interacted with her, how they cared for her, the compassion that they put forth. I wanted to be part of that. And I wanted to make a difference in oncology care. So when I graduated nursing school, I went straight into oncology, and that's where I've been ever since. I've had many different roles within nursing: inpatient, infusion, navigation. It led me to become a nurse practitioner. I worked in GI oncology for about 10 years, then had a stint in interventional radiology, and then I missed oncology and came back. And so it's been my life, and I enjoy working with cancer patients and seeing the progress that we've made since I got into this field. Currently, I work at Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center in Miami, Florida. I am an oncology nurse practitioner, still practicing, but I have a dual role as a healthcare administrator as well. I run a lot of the cancer programs at Sylvester, focused mostly on cancer survivorship, cancer support services, and advanced practice as well. And as Trey mentioned, I remember that memory in being in that APRN conference, but the first memory of ONS that I remember was actually my first Congress, which was in DC. And it was so powerful because we're going back to DC next year. And it's good to kind of go full circle. I was a brand new nurse coming into oncology, going to my first Congress, feeling invigorated at DC, seeing how much we can do with our voices as oncology nurses. I remember always the opening ceremonies. And that's what always invigorates me to go back, is those conversations with each other, the networking that we have, the stories that we share together that unite us as oncology nurses and know that we're making a huge difference in cancer care. So those were my thoughts and my memories and my story. And I hope that somebody out there can relate to that, because I know there's a lot of young nurses out there wondering what they need to do to be a great oncology nurse. And I think just being connected with ONS is the best thing you can do for yourselves.
Jessica, I want to follow up on something you said, because you're absolutely right. The opening ceremonies of ONS Congress are always one of my favorite things, because I sit in the audience every single time, never fails. And I look around the audience, it brings tears to my eyes, because I think, oh my gosh, there are 3,000, 4,000, 6,000 nurses sitting in this room who care as much about cancer patients and their families as I do. I look around the room with wonder when I see that. So you're absolutely right about those opening ceremonies.
I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about your being the first directors who were selected by our Leadership Development Committee. And I think that members might be interested in what made you raise your hand and say you were interested in board service. Jessica, why don't you start this one? And then Susan and Trey, just jump in with, why did you raise your hand? What was the voice and what was it telling you?
I always like to say some stories. I'm a storyteller. So when I was 22 years old, I was a young oncology nurse in Miami, Florida. As I mentioned, I had my first job in an inpatient oncology unit. And one day I was taking care of a young patient with metastatic pancreatic cancer that was of high acuity. I definitely remember feeling overwhelmed, not yet confident in my skills. And one of the clinical nurse specialists came up to me and asked me how I was doing. And I shared how I felt. I knew I needed more knowledge and support to effectively navigate that challenging case and treatment protocol. And that's when she introduced me to the Oncology Nursing Society. And with the help and her mentorship and all the resources, I realized that I had access from ONS. I was able to develop one of the most trusting and strong nurse-patient connections I've had with any patient and their family. And I still remember that patient to this day. And it's led me to raise my hand to serve on the board for ONS, because they provided me with such an incredible, much needed support, especially in that instance and throughout my career. I really wanted to pay it forward. And I also want to continue to be a voice and advocate for our patients and members. And there's no better platform then ONS to take my advocacy to the next level. I could not be prouder to lead ONS in this role and to contribute to its mission of excellence in oncology nursing and transforming cancer care.
I think for me, what really made me want to get involved with board service is the background in my previous stints volunteering in so many different aspects of ONS. It's really a natural progression. You started volunteering at a local level, really got plugged in, and then, volunteered for things on the national level, really enjoyed my activity there. And I got so much positive feedback from the work that was being done. I just felt like I needed to give back. And so for me, this was my way of giving back. I can't emphasize enough. I think a big portion of me doing this was also mentorship being involved. I had so many great people through ONS pour into me over the years and really lead me to where I'm at today. I'm so honored and blessed to sort of be sitting on the board and helping do the work that honestly was pretty intimidating as I look back 15 years ago. And so again, I think that just encouraging people that it's not nearly as intimidating as it looks, and there's opportunities for people to get engaged. So that's what led me to get involved with serving on the board.
What led me to decide at this point in life to throw my hat in the ring for consideration for the board was really thinking about, as I approach what we called at ONS Congress this year, preferment rather than retirement. But as I approach that time in my life and thinking about who's coming along behind to lead oncology nursing into the future, and what can we do to help people move into leadership roles, not just at the board level, but anywhere. And knowing that it's hard enough to get formal leaders like into management positions because nobody wants to deal with the things that sometimes leaders have to deal with, but just concern for who's coming along behind and going to carry the torch forward for the excitement around ONS and the work that only ONS can do. So really thinking about leadership development, and then focusing on other ideas in my head about, gosh, what I'd like to see ONS be doing more of. And gosh, maybe I can influence some of that by looking to serve on the board. So I just thought it was the right time, the right place, the right time in my career so that when the door opened, I walked through.
Thank you all. And thank you that you did raise your hand. But now let's talk about what the Leadership Development Committee, the stages of that process that they put you through and getting to the point of your selection. Trey, why don't you talk a little bit about what that was like? What things did you have to do along the process? Because I think listeners may not realize the rigor of the process that you all experienced.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that question, Brenda. If I had to describe the process, I think if I had to describe it in one word, I would say it was thorough. And I certainly appreciate why that is sitting where I'm sitting today. But I wanted to touch on something that Susan mentioned. She talked a little bit about leadership development. And I think, honestly, a lot of it begins there because, we're talking a lot about the ONS board and the responsibility of being on the board here. But there's so much great work that's going on within the Leadership Development Committee. I had the opportunity of being mentored by the Leadership Development Committee through one of the offerings at one of the ONS congresses. And for me, that was the beginning of my journey on the ONS board. Maybe not the beginning, but that was certainly towards the latter stages of me confirming that this is something that I really wanted to take on. One of the first steps, if interested in joining the board or running for the board, is a notification of intent. And once you submit your notification of intent, there's a pretty intensive application process that one goes through where you provide a lot of background on yourself. After that, then there are a series of interviews that are set up at various stages through the process. But I will say this, that, there's a lot of resources, a lot of information on the ONS website that walks you through it step by step. And I would certainly encourage anybody who has an interest to dive into that and not be intimidated by the process itself, because the process is intense for a reason. It's thorough for a reason. I certainly appreciate the process and what we went through to get where we're at today.
I would say, Trey, I would echo your word of intense. I thought it was intense. I thought it was very thorough. But I think about the responsibility that LDC has taken on to appoint board members rather than have them elected. And I think part of that, and Brenda, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but part of the thinking there was to make sure that we get members on the board from diverse backgrounds, from different levels of experience, from different perspectives, and that we don't want it to be just a voting process and who knows whom the best, that it really was intended to focus on filling maybe identified gaps that the previous board had identified. And gee, we need to fill this skill set. I once had a mentor, not in oncology, she was my CNO at the time. I was complaining about a coworker, and this coworker was very detail oriented and really drove me nuts. And my boss said to me, that's exactly why you need to be working with her, because she is way better at the details than you are. And you're way better than she is at kind of a higher level thinking. And I need both of you to make things work. So I think as an ONS board, LDC is working really hard to identify what are the skill sets needed to lead an organization of this size with integrity, with compassion, and with very high expectations. So I found it very intense, but very self-reflective as I looked at filling out the paperwork and going through the interviews. The only good thing was that since this wasn't an actual job interview, because we don't get paid to be on the board, it was also kind of fun. So even in the interviews, it was fun to be chatting with the LDC members.
You explained that very well, Susan, in terms of why we are now in this framework of appointed board members, so that really we are getting people with the experience, the diversity, knowledge that fill gaps potentially. And that is a joint, just so that listeners understand, that's joint work that the board and the LDC do. So the board evaluates itself and saying, these three are going off, and this is what we are losing of the three who are going off. And we definitely need somebody who comes in with this experience. But we also know that in the next 2 years, these are high priorities, and we really like somebody who can come in with this experience. So there's an iteration back and forth. We were very pleased this year, just so that people listening know, there were 22 people who raised their hands. I asked you all to describe your process or your experience with the process, but this began with 22 people and 3 were appointed. We were very, very grateful and pleased and proud of everybody who raised their hand in this. Jessica, I'm going to let you share how you thought the experience was.
So I have a combination of what Trey and Susan said. So Trey, I agree with you. The LDC meetings at Congress were super helpful for me to get direction on where to go. And you meet people there from the LDC, and you meet board members as well that can share their experiences and kind of guide you to what to take as the next step. It could be not just board service, but any other volunteer opportunity, like you mentioned, Trey. For me, I think definitely I had to put a lot of thought into the process. It is work, but it's very structured and very organized. And I felt very supported by the ONS staff and by the LDC throughout the whole process. So I'll just end with that, because I think everybody else kind of covered everything. And I think, again, great job by the LDC and the ONS staff on the process itself and the way they went about it.
Jessica, I'm going to let you lead off on this next one. I want everybody to be aware of, you all just began your term at Congress this year in San Antonio. So you had limited board meetings so far. There was an in-person board meeting at headquarters in May, and we've had one virtual board meeting. So just talk a little bit about what it's been like in these first couple of board meetings. Were there surprises on the agenda for you? Board members also have subcommittee assignments. Share what your subcommittee assignments are, if you would.
It's been quite exciting since I began my term at Congress in San Antonio. The board meetings, I think, have been really inviting, informational, inspiring, all at the same time. What struck me the most is the breadth and depth of issues we tackle. I think from policy to strategic initiatives, The agenda is truly dynamic, and it's been a testament to how every aspect of our profession can be a catalyst for change. I think the surprise has been the agility and transparency of our board. Many of the discussions at board meetings, I think as a general member, I already had a little bit of an idea of what was happening. So the voice of the member is definitely the driving force for the board meetings. In reference to the subcommittees I participate in, I'm in two. I'm serving on the budget committee, which is responsible in reviewing the overall budget for ONS before it's reviewed and approved by the full board. This committee is important, and as Brenda mentioned, we provide oversight of the ONS finances and assure that the organization is fiscally responsible. I also sit on the positions committee, which speaks to the unique perspective ONS may provide on an issue, and new positions are developed on a topic that is current and significant. The purpose of the position subcommittee is to inform policymakers, the ONS members, and others of the issues and their positions taken and supported by ONS. It also includes drafting white papers, which is great because I love to write when there's an important topic that requires review. And members actually can review the different position statement that ONS has already approved on the website. So if you're interested, take a look because we have taken many positions on different issues around oncology nursing.
I don't think there were surprises on the agenda. I have to be honest, I was amazed by the depth and breadth of the agenda and that we actually would get through it in the time allotted because there is a lot to talk about. There's a lot involved in oversight and governing of the Oncology Nursing Society. I will say one of my personal problems on the board that I'm working on is prior to being on the ONS board, I have been on a couple of other organizational boards, but those boards did not have the ONS office infrastructure. So if you were a board member and suggested something that you want the organization to take a look at, you then owned it and you had to go do it. And with the ONS board, I think we forget that we have an entire staff not in Pittsburgh. We have a headquarters in Pittsburgh, but we have an ONS staff that is really doing the hard work behind the scenes of the organization. And so I have to keep telling myself that, this is different. And there are the ONS staff that really can do the work and the board doesn't have to do it. The board can suggest things. The board can potentially come up with ideas or maybe a new product or service that they'd like the staff to take a look at. So it's a little different experience for me. And I have to keep reminding myself of that. I happen to be on the board development subcommittee. So that is the subcommittee that is really looking at how do we keep the board learning and growing and motivated and interested in what they're doing. And I think that's great because that means that the ONS board does not think their work is ever done. And they do not think that they are completely done learning what it is to be a board member. So I found that work fun just in the first couple of meetings. Trey, how about you?
So while I agree very much with, Jessica and Susan's description of my activities so far with the board, I was not really surprised with anything I've encountered on the board. It's very much what I expected it to be. I guess if there's one thing is how efficient the meetings run. I think that board members, whether it be president, whether it be Brenda and her role there, the entire group is very intentional about the content that's being discussed, very respectful of others' opinions, making sure that everyone has a voice, that everyone's represented. It really has been run like a well-oiled machine. For us to cover the amount of content that we've covered in just a few board meetings is remarkable. And as I sit back and just review, even historically, the information that has been reviewed and the things that have been accomplished, I've just got an appreciation for the amount of time and work that's put into these board meetings. In terms of the subcommittees that I'm on, I too participate on the board development committee. And I'll just add a little bit to Susan's description of that committee. I think for me, this can be described as just continued leadership development. I think the need was recognized that just because you're on the board of directors, it doesn't mean that the leadership journey is over. There's continued need for development. And I think that that's the purpose of this group, to foster continued leadership development. We make it a priority at each board meeting to come up with new and innovative ideas and ways for the board members to connect and continue that leadership journey. For me, lastly, I think that one of the neatest things about this journey is just how easy it was to integrate into this board. I wasn't sure when you're joining a group where work has been going on for years before you got on it. Sometimes it's difficult to plug in and pick up right where someone else left off, but I'm really surprised at how this transition has occurred. And I'm certainly appreciative of the thoughtfulness, the actions that have been laid out to make the transition easy for new board members. So that's my experience as an early board member.
I would just add one thing to that. You're absolutely right. I didn't know anybody on the board when I joined. I knew the outgoing president, and I know Brenda because I've known Brenda for years, but I didn't know any of the other board members, including my two newest colleagues. And I'm so impressed to a person with the dedication and the commitment that is shown by all. This is, I said before, it's not a paid position. And so we are volunteering time. And when you look at the time involved for meeting prep, the time involved for our committee assignments, the time involved for the board, and again, whether it's the 9 people sitting around the table or the 6,000 sitting in opening ceremonies, I'm just so impressed and inspired by the dedication and commitment of the people sitting around that table. And I agree, Trey, I feel like we were welcomed with open arms, and I felt like a newbie for about 5 minutes and then felt like we were just part and parcel of the group.
I'm going to pivot a little bit from what we've been talking about and really want us to maybe spend just a few minutes thinking about the critical issues that are happening in the healthcare environment and nursing and cancer care. You are in, as you introduce yourself, you're in diverse settings, different parts of the country. You have different roles in your organizations. As you look ahead to the 3 years that you'll be serving on the board, what are some of those big issues out there that concern you? Maybe some things that you're seeing in trends that maybe encourage you? Are some of them maybe opportunities for ONS, ways that we may be able to influence excellence in cancer care, influence our mission? Let's think about that for just a few minutes. Trey, why don't you start us off?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in here. And I'll just start by reinforcing something that was mentioned a little while ago. I certainly appreciate the diversity that the board represents. I'm happy to, whether we're talking about geographic diversity, whether we're talking about a rural versus an urban hospital, all the different, areas that the board represents. For me personally, I come from a rural state in Mississippi. As I mentioned before, the only academic medical center in the state, one that has largely provided care to a population that has had access to care issues, and many would say that are just very underrepresented. So I think in terms of what would concern me over the next few years, it's a lot of the same issues probably that would concern Jessica and Susan. I think when you look about all the conversations that have come up about nursing burnout, following the pandemic, some of the issues we're dealing with today with nurse staffing ratios, when we talk about disparities in healthcare, access to healthcare, drug shortages, all the conversations around increased drug pricing, and really just having trouble even getting the medication that the patients need today. I think the focus really needs to be on what is encouraging, because for all the things that concern me, I think that there's opportunity for encouragement. I think that there's opportunities for organizations like ours to move nursing forward, whether it's through grassroots efforts of, local ONS chapters, or whether it's work that's being done on a national level in DC. I think there's so many opportunities. And specifically, if you look next year, ONS is going to be celebrating their 50th anniversary. And I just think what better time to highlight the great work and the opportunity that ONS is doing than through this 50th anniversary celebration. So for me, that's just a highlight of some of the things, that opportunities that I see.
I agree, Trey. A lot of the things you mentioned are some of the concerns I have. I think the nursing and provider shortage is a major concern. I think we need to make significant efforts in training and retraining the next generation to be able to continue to provide cancer care. I think it's up to everyone to empower and support oncology nurses to give the best care for cancer patients, survivors, and their caregivers. I'm incredibly encouraged about the commitment, resilience, and passion I see in this organization, as we go into our 50th anniversary. And I'm confident that this organization will always be in the forefront of oncology care and supporting us as oncology nurses, and even worldwide, in keeping up to date with the latest research, technology, and information. I think there's several opportunities. One of them, again, you mentioned, Trey, was, advocacy, federal legislation, and how ONS is well positioned to shape policy, elevate our standards of care, and ensure oncology nurses' voice is heard in the crucial decisions about the future of cancer care. There's a lot of policy coming up that really will affect not just the patient, but nursing in general. And I think ONS, continues to be a voice for us all over the world, actually, in improving and providing the highest quality of care for our patients. I think another opportunity is, filling the gap with advanced practice providers. I think you're going to see that as we move into the future, as we have a shortage of oncologists, advanced practice providers that are trained in oncology is definitely an opportunity. And ONS has developed so many resources for advanced practice providers as well that I think is really of benefit to the next generation that's looking to advance their career as a nurse practitioner. So definitely, I think there's opportunity there. And then, with all the challenges, definitely, I think overall, it's just a thrilling time to be part of oncology nursing and part of ONS.
I think you both highlighted things that would be on my list. The things that I would kind of add to is looking at how do we develop pre-licensure interest in oncology to begin with. How do we get out to the nursing students and let them know that oncology is a fabulous specialty and not a depressing one, because that is often the impression they come out of school with. The second thing, to expand a little bit on what you said about what Oncology Nursing Society currently does, they are the number one education provider for oncology nurses across the country. And when you look at the attendance at Congress, almost every year, I think this is true, the majority of Congress attendees are frontline nurses, and it's their first time that they've been there. And so we keep having a lot of first timers, and that just tells me that our job of educating the oncology nurses of the future is a never-ending process. I remember having a discussion with PJ Haylock when she was chair of Congress committee, and I was on the committee, and I said, oh my gosh, do we have to do chemotherapy 101 again? And she said, yes, because new people keep coming and need to learn these things. So I think ONS can never lose sight of the fact that they are the primary educator of oncology nurses around the world. Lastly, just because of my leadership focus, I also think that Oncology Nursing Society has a responsibility for how do we ensure that we have the leaders of the future, that we have somebody who can carry on the specialty, that as a board, we may have the responsibility of finding a new CEO or constantly finding new people to lead the organization. And I just want to make sure that if, God forbid, I ever develop cancer in my old age, that there's somebody there to take care of me. And knowing that ONS is there to educate and develop the oncology nurses of the future, I can be assured that I'm going to get good care.
Well said. So we have reached the end of our time together. And before we sign off, I invite each of you to share any last reflections or messages to our members. Susan, why don't you lead off?
I am privileged and honored to be serving amongst a group of professionals on the board that in 2 meetings I already have such tremendous respect for, and that I am honored to serve for ONS, an organization that I think has always stayed true to its mission and done what needed to be done to keep oncology nursing as a specialty and to make sure that we have the folks we need to take care of our cancer patients and their families well into the future.
Trey?
Again, I agree with what Susan said. I'm humbled by the opportunity to serve on the board, to serve with so many great leaders, to represent such a great profession, a great group of nurses. And I think it's reassuring to sit on this side of the board and see that there is so much great work being done. There's so much thought that's put into making sure that nurses are represented all across the country in every sector. And it has already been such a rewarding experience. And I just appreciate the opportunity to network and work with such great people. And again, looking forward to a great 3-year run here.
Jessica?
Ditto, Trey and Susan. It's been a tremendous honor getting to know both of you, the whole board, Brenda, the ONS staff. It's really been an amazing time and a privilege to serve on the board. If you're passionate about oncology nursing and want to make a broader impact, a volunteer opportunity or board position, I think is one of the most fulfilling avenues to do so. And as Trey and Susan mentioned, the strength of our organization comes from the diversity of its members. I think everybody brings unique experiences, a voice, a perspective, all is valuable, and you are needed, and the impact you can make is profound. So I wouldn't hesitate. I never thought that I would be serving on the national board, but here I am because I stepped forward, I raised my hand, and I said, I'm ready to contribute, and I hope you can do the same. And I want to encourage everyone listening to lean onto your mentors or find one. I think the guidance and support I received from the two I had, which I'll mention, Marsha Richardson and Eileen Butler, if you're listening, thank you so much for everything that you've done. And for all oncology nurses, it led me to be the oncology nurse and nurse practitioner I am today. So take advantage of all the opportunities that come your way. Thank you so much.
Well said, Jessica. I think that was a nice closing there. Thank you all for sharing who you are, what your experiences have been, your insights in terms of our organization and our members, and your passion and enthusiasm for leading this organization, I think, was throughout our whole discussion. I hope members see that you're bringing a depth of experience, different kinds of experience, different regions, different roles, that you're integrated well into I love that, somebody mentioning earlier how quickly you integrated into the continuing 6, which isn't always the easiest to do, but they were welcoming and so excited to have you join them. So I really hope that people hear this and understand, Jessica, to your comment, yes, they too could be on this board a year or two from now if they raise their hand, and there are the resources to go to help them with that process. I want to remind everybody who's listening that you can earn free NCPD contact hours. The evaluation link is in the end notes of this episode. So thank you all for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Oncology Nursing Podcast. Tell us about your favorite part in this episode by leaving a review wherever you download your podcast. For more resources and information about oncology nursing, visit us at ons.org or voice.ons.org. The ideas and opinions shared in this episode represent those of the guest and not necessarily ONS.